gonna bear witness today. We must never allow anybody to naturalize criminality, to make crimes look like it's part of the natural order.
We're fighting up, we shall not be moved. We're fighting for our freedom, we shall not be moved. Just like a tree, baby with that we shall not be moved. We're fighting for our children. We're fighting for our children. We shall not be moved. We're fighting for our children.
White supremacy is not welcome here. No hate, no fear. White supremacy is not welcome here. No hate, no fear. We have already won. We have already won.
All right, give me some shield guys in front. Let's go. Shield guys in front. Let's go.
We have already won. We have already won.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for Praying with Our Feet, a panel with religious activists reflecting on the Unite the Right rally that occurred here in Charlottesville 3 years ago today. I'm Martine Halverson-Taylor, Associate Professor and Associate Department Chair of Religious Studies at the University of Virginia, and I'm also the co-director of the Religion, Race, and Democracy Lab, which is delighted to host this event. We are recording today's webinar so that it is available on our website, religionlab.virginia.edu, where you can also learn more about the Religion, Race, and Democracy Lab. If you're interested in programs like this, we encourage you to turn into our podcast, Sacred and Profane, available wherever you listen to podcasts. In our most recent episode, we explore, with tonight's moderator, Professor Jelaine Schmidt, as our expert guide, religion as an often overlooked aspect of Confederate monuments. Finally, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's panelist and moderator. Don Gathers is a deacon at First Baptist Church on West Main Street, the oldest Black church in town, founded by former slaves, and a founding member of Charlottesville Black Lives Matter and the Police Civilian Review Board. Gathers served as co-chair of Charlottesville's 2016 Blue Ribbon Commission on Race, Memorials, and Public Spaces. Rabbi Rachel Schmelkin was associate rabbi for Charlottesville's Congregation Beth Israel from 2016 to 2020. She received TRUA's Action Under Fire Award for her work 3 years ago. The Reverend Sekou is a community organizer, pastor, theologian, writer, and musician. He worked with Congregate Seville, a local faith-based school for public witness, to prepare demonstrators for counter-protests on August 12th. Grace Herons, a UVA alumna, who earned her degree in religious studies, is currently the communications director of the international anti-racist group Showing Up for Racial Justice, or SURJ. She was an organizer with the local SURJ chapter in 2017. And finally, tonight's moderator, Professor Jelaine Schmidt. Jelaine Schmidt is a scholar activist based in Charlottesville, where she teaches in the Religious Studies Department at the University of Virginia. During the 2017 Summer of Hate, Schmidt co-founded the local chapter of Black Lives Matter, and she helped plan the counter-protests on August 12th. She is known locally for leading public tours which focus on local African-American history. We want to encourage audience members to engage in the conversation by raising questions throughout the program. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens, since the chat and raise hands functions have been disabled. Tonight's speakers will be able to see your questions and will reserve time at the end to answer as many as they can. And please note that all attendees have the ability to upvote each other's questions. And now I turn it over to Professor Schmidt and our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Martine, and thank you to the Religion, Race, and Democracy Lab for hosting our conversation tonight. This has already been a big day for us in Charlottesville, marking this 3rd anniversary. With a gathering in the park there, which has just concluded. And now it seems like an appropriate time to reflect on where we've been, how we got there, and where we've gone since. So I want to kind of open up our conversation by asking the panelists, just kind of how we got there, how we traveled this far along the way, as the old spiritual says, and if you can talk about what spiritual practices energized you as you prepared, as you thought about going out to the streets. Or another way of asking that is kind of what aspects of your religious tradition motivated you, so what motivated you religiously, and what spiritual practices energized you as you did your work.
Well, I'll be happy to jump in and talk about the necessity to help the downtrodden, if you will, those who might be looked upon as being not necessarily the least among us, but those most in need of assistance. And leaning heavily on faith to pull us through that day, that weekend, that summer, and even up through now, as we continue to battle many of those same issues.
Yeah, I think for me, hey y'all, my name is Grace. So glad to be here with you tonight. Gosh, spiritual practices that got me through, I think when I can try to sensorily imagine in my body what it feels like to be in Charlottesville in the summer of 2017, there is a lot of heart racing in my body. There's a lot of, fear and anxiety. And I think about the long meetings, but a thing that feels like it characterized the whole summer was the singing. Charlottesville now, I think for people that came to visit us and who stood with us, our comrades on that day and through that summer, often remarked on how much Charlottesville activists learned how to sing and liked to sing. And I credit, the many spiritual traditions having singing as a practice to speak to people's spirits, to feed folks, and also to kind of give you words when you don't have words to say. And I just remember, singing a lot. And that was not a thing that I had thought of so much as a spiritual practice that would get me through one of the most difficult times in my life. But I look back and I was like, wow, that singing was the little boat that at least carried me through. And I think many of us through a lot of stuff that was really difficult.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out here that reminds me, you're talking about singing, the Reverend Tracy Howe Wispelway, who was, a musician and pastor, who played her guitar and taught us songs. And she was the first one that I remember saying, or the first time it kind of hit me when she said, it's easier to sing your way through resistance than to be shouting. You can actually maintain your energy, and actually your energy will swell through that. I remember that, and as a takeaway. So thanks for saying that, Grace. That's a wonderful point. What about others of you? Things that sustained you, things that brought you, to this work?
What Grace says about music very much resonates for me, as well as far as spiritual sustenance and a feeling of unity and community. I think for me, the decision to protest and the decision to show up with my body, I really had a deep sense, deep within, that ignoring white supremacists and neo-Nazis was not an acceptable response to what was about to occur. And I think Jews know all too well that uncontested fascists quickly turns deadly. You know, the neo-Nazis were writing in the Daily Stormer in the days leading up to August 12th. Next stop, Charlottesville, final stop, Auschwitz. There was no question in my mind when they said that they were invoking dead Jews, but that they were also talking about murdering Black and brown people and immigrants and Muslims and LGBTQ folks, and that had to be stopped. And I think the last thing I'll say is that, you know, when I was 16 years old, I went to the Czech Republic. I stood in a concentration camp, and I stood inside of a crematorium where Jewish bodies had been burned. I will never forget what that smelled like. And so the combination of that experience with the values and teachings of Judaism, of justice that we shall pursue and loving our neighbors, and we were once strangers, and treat the strangers with love and respect, for all of those things, I think led me to know that I had to show up and show up strong.
Great, thank you.
Well, first, just thank you all. First, I want to say, I think this answers your question indirectly. Well, directly, Professor Smith, is that I am overcome by a deep sense of love by just seeing you all's faces. That was a hot, long, lots of meeting, lots of fighting and disagreeing, and that somehow you all invited me into your community as your son and brother. And so for that, I'm eternally grateful. And I'm just, that the work that we did on that day was holy work. And it was a holy work that covered a range of political identities, in the sense of, we were in conversation with Antifa, that we were in conversations with little old church ladies. We were in conversations with folks who we actually disagree with on a certain set of political things, but we knew one thing, as Rabbi Rachel has noted, that we would not let them march through these streets uncontested. And so I think for me, one of the sustenance for me is that even in the midst of, because you people forget, y'all called hell all that summer. That was the 4th white supremacist march, right? But somehow in the midst of that, we laughed. We laughed a lot, and we made fun of each other, and we made sure we didn't take ourselves too seriously, and we made sure the other people didn't take themselves. So there was, in the midst of it, there was this joy that just for me permeated everything. You know what I mean? And so I think that the things I've been thinking through as of late, I did some trainings in Minneapolis and in Seattle in the midst of these new uprisings. And as I've thought more and more about militant nonviolence, civil disobedience, about this ideas of deep abiding love, subversive joy, and revolutionary grace. And all of those things were at work in Charlottesville. And it was a wonder to see, and it was a privilege and a blessing to serve you all, and to be in struggle with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. You know, you mentioned there, Rev Sekou, you mentioned, you know, trainings, you know, coming here, and I'd like to hear from all members of the panel about discipline, you know, both, you know, kind of spiritual discipline and tactical discipline, you know, in terms of training for being on the streets during the Summer of Hate. You know, what can you say, you know, what did you learn from these practices, and what do you take with you?
The training was deep, and it was heavy, and just the mere fact that it was embedded in us that the possibility existed that someone very well and very possibly could die that weekend. And sadly, of course, that did manifest itself. But the teachings of civil disobedience through nonviolence, to not respond to the evilness that's presented in front of you, and that's the difficulty we continue to face. Being able to bear all that hatred as it presents itself, but still try to speak to the soul that dwells within. And that's where the true dichotomy of man, I guess, would present itself. How do you see that as it's just barking and spewing all the evilness in front of you, but realizing that there's a soul within that's still pure, that's still reachable. And that's what we as people of faith have to always keep in mind.
When I hear your question, Jelaine, I think it's so easy for us to think about August 11th and 12th as, 2 days, but as Rev Sekou already has said, it was so much that was leading up to the events that happened in Charlottesville. And I think it's also easy, especially maybe even in a religious panel, to think that like being an organizer or being an activist means taking action with your body in a direct action, nonviolent direct action on that one day in that event. But all of us sitting here know that it was so much less glamorous and sexy. Not that August 12th was glamorous, but it's so much less of like a photo op moment. Like the real work is being in relationship with people. And being in the Christian tradition, when I think about Jesus as an organizer and as like the organizer that I try to model my life off of, that it wasn't all like miracles and glamour. A lot of it was learning how to build relationship with people. And so, yeah, when I think about training, I think about, and like my spiritual disciplines of training that I learned that summer, for me, and the way that I was sort of like conditioned as a person, some of it was learning how to be in principled conflict with people. It was learning how to say sorry and mean it and stay in a relationship. It was learning how to be accountable for my actions and hold my friends accountable for their actions, because we want to be growing together. So I think there's this, kind of like emotional side of it as well. That's not just the moment, the day of action kind of training that you think of, but rather how do we sustain our movements for the long haul? We learn that are beyond the August 11th and 12th of the world. We learn how to take care of each other, and we learn how to take care of ourselves. And I know probably every spiritual tradition speaks to that. So that's the kind of day in, day out kind of anti-racism starts at home, learning how to be in movement together.
I think one of the things that come to mind was one in terms of like the group that I trained with, Deep Abiding Love, particularly Gretchen Honhold and Lizzie Paget, is that we had never dealt with armed actors before, right? So we're used to dealing with state violence, so we can handle police, and so we called in the Christian peacemaker teams. Sister Sarah Nahar, who ran us through drills about what to do with the active shooter, right? Which was a new thing that we incorporated. And it's something we've had to do now in this current iteration with people getting shot at protests and that kind of thing. So it's been incorporated in our trainings in Seattle and in Minneapolis. And so that was new for me in terms of just dealing with the armed actors and that kind of sense. I think one of the things on the training, and it's something that I've really carried as a burden, because I did not prepare us for the car. I didn't anticipate it. It was just nowhere. And for a long time, I carried that. In part because you know, it's something I should have thought. I feel like I should have thought of, right? And there are multiple reasons why the car got through and that kind of thing. But still, that's something that I've carried and wrestled with and had to come to terms with. And I think one of the spiritual disciplines in that has been that I'm not a Messiah, right? That for the Abrahamic faith, for the most part, right? The Messiahs have come. They come again. I doubt if it's a 50-year-old black man from Zen, Arkansas. And so I think there was for me an arrogance that I needed to repent from, and thinking that I could anticipate all things and know all things. And then lastly, I think as it relates to that, because I think it's about relationships and it's not the sexy stuff, you know, as you were saying, Grace, my band performed in Charlottesville last fall at the Feisty Festival, and when we sang "Bury Me," Tracy's song, Susan Bro was sitting side stage, Heather's mom, and she walked up and she hugged me, and there was something freeing about that for me. Of this question about the responsibility that I felt as relates to that. And so I think one of the spiritual disciplines is what are the ways in which there is a humility about our own capacity, and that we leave it to something bigger than ourselves. For me, right, in the tradition that I come from, is what are the ways in which I am trying to stand before the God of Jesus with all due humility and all due grace.
You know, I heard you say something there, Reverend Sekou, about, you know, the kind of unanticipated elements that, you know, that we strongly, you know, we thought there would be gunfire. There was a strong chance, and indeed someone did fire their gun. Fortunately, nobody was struck by the bullet. But yeah, but not anticipating, you know, a car attack, and that you've kind of had to, you know, think about that. And I mean, it sounds like, you know, you've kind of had to talk yourself through some, I guess the question I'm trying to ask about is trauma and guilt. That I think so many of us, you know, after the summer of hate, carried trauma and or guilt, and in different ways, you know. And if folks could speak to, as much as you're comfortable, speak to how your religious practices and commitments helped you to, you know, to face the aftermath, I guess.
We're still dealing with it. We're still very much dealing with it. I can't tell you how many times today I have just clearly out of the blue just broken down and started crying. It's something that is just stuck with us and will be with us forever and ever. Amen. And Rev, just like you, we felt and we continue to feel that day that we could have done more, that we should have done more. And I imagine that, I don't know what that looks like. I have no idea what else we could have done. That guilt will forever hover in our spirit and in our being. And I don't know how to eliminate or eradicate that from ourselves, and I don't know that we should. I remember very, very vividly, we all were sitting there together, Reverend Sekou, when we got that fateful phone call and made that mad dash down Water Street. not knowing what we would be confronting or what it would look like or what we were running into, but we just knew that we had to be there. And I'm just, let me just say, I'm so thankful for each one of you all being there and being in my life that day and moving forward, because it's rough. It was rough then, and it continues to be rough now. And just finding those avenues and those vehicles to move forward, we're still searching. Individually and collectively, we're still very much searching. And I'm thankful for the power of prayer. There are many days that's all that, not only that gets you through the day, but that's what gets you up in the morning and gets you started on that day.
I think, for me, part of the way I deal with it is that I have a strong determination now to use the experiences I had in Charlottesville and all that I learned in the training and after in the future in any kind of situation in which I think it will help. And this would be too long of a story to tell right now, but I will share just a small piece of it, which is that just a few months after August 12th, I was at a very, very large conference for the Reformed Jewish movement. And as I was leaving the conference center that evening, there was a Black woman who had gotten into some kind of altercation with the mall security, and they had pinned her to the ground in the mall. And I knew what to do in that situation because of the training with Rev Sekou. And I stood there with, I don't know how like maybe 100 other Jewish people coming out of this conference, each of us videotaping from a different angle, and each of us like refusing to leave as these security officers were telling us to leave until they removed themselves from her and she was able to get up and we could see that she could breathe and wasn't hurt. And so I think like, there was a part of me in that moment that I was like, oh my gosh, are these things gonna just chase me everywhere? And then I sort of checked myself and I was like, they chase our Black and brown brothers and sisters everywhere. And so yes, everywhere I go, I'm going to see this. And everywhere I go, I can take the lessons that I've learned here in Charlottesville and apply them.
I have two thoughts about trauma and healing. First is that I saw that my acupuncturist is on this call, so I have to say that I think in some ways some of the unsung heroes of healing in Charlottesville were mental health care professionals and body workers who, many of whom offered their services for free for activists and people of color for months. Also Common Ground Healing Arts, like offering services for people of color for free. And I think that, yeah, I was able to get like spiritual care and body work done and my therapy paid for like a year after the Charlottesville attacks, which I just think we don't talk about enough, and like people, they don't get thanked enough for that. But the other thing that I was gonna say is that something that's so healing for me is continuing to feel like what happened that day mattered, and it's connected to everything else that's happening in the world. So as we're seeing folks snatched off the streets in Portland by federal agents, or, you know, as people are fighting white supremacy all across the globe, or, you know, folks getting put in cages at the border, like to be able to articulate this is all related, like it's all the same systems that are being propped up as what we were fighting against in Charlottesville, to just continue to thread those needles and know that this is one event that was part of a long struggle, and there's so many people that are with me fighting their, you know, versions of whatever white supremacist Charlottesville is happening with them. It makes me feel less alone.
Right.
Two things. I moved into a monastery for 3 months. Like I was like, I just needed. I didn't have anything else. You know, I was like, I'm done. I retired. And so I moved into and part of when I moved into the monastery, because part of what hegemony and white supremacy do to us, right, is that they demand that we live in crisis, and that crisis can be addictive, right. So kind of rushing and looking for the next thing to do and what the next crisis is, and escalating this sometimes the simplest things to high questions of existential discourse, when it's really about, you know, a cup of coffee, is part of what the culture does to us around a crisis. And so one of the things I had to do in moving in and getting a spiritual director of Father Jerome, was to repent from living in crisis, because I was good at it. Right. So that was one. And then two is what you raised, Grace, is the gift of Charlottesville, right? So part of what we have to understand is that Charlottesville is a multiracial, right, multi-contextual, multi-gendered, multi-classed, right, multi-sectored movement, collectively resisting fascism, right, that deploys both the tradition of militant nonviolent civil disobedience and the tradition of self-defense vis-a-vis Antifa, right? That's a rare moment in American history where all of these elements are happening, right? I can't, I'm thinking the pastor's name, her mama, 88. She's a Lutheran pastor, mama 88, talking about, Reverend, should I bring my bail money with me when I go to jail? She said, I said, well, we got a bail form, mother. And she says, no, that's for the babies. Right. And I'm talking to her, and then I go over and I talk, and then the Redneck Revolt is saying what you need. You see what I'm saying? Right. And so that's how you know me. And then, right, and after Charlottesville, you get 60,000 in Boston. Right? You get like 100,000 in California. They get run out of Charlottesville. And I know all of us in this conversation, we're in conversations with people in all those sites. They were calling us. What do we need to do, right? And so rabbis call me, I say, call Rabbi Rachel, right? You know what I'm saying, right? So there's a way in which that part of the healing is to recognize the way in which we stopped them from marching in the streets. We didn't get them out of the White House yet, right? But we did stop them from marching in the street. And as my grandmama would say, I get joy when I think about it.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I like what you said earlier, Rev Sekou, about you know, kind of humility and, you know, and kind of yeah, just, you know, realizing we don't have all the answers, and also you know, I appreciated learning, I think, you know, from all of you that are here. And there, you know, this is just, I have to say, you know, to our audience, this is just a small subset of religious activists. And there were, you know, a whole range of activists, you know, that were on the streets those days, you know, and this is just a, you know, just kind of representative sample, as it were. And there are so many other folks out there, you know, so, but I've learned a lot from everybody, you know, and yeah, and you know, not having all the answers, but you know, you know, kind of taking cues from, you know, from folks who have learned things elsewhere, and you know, and putting that together. And yes, also being in you know, in conversation with others, you know, kind of going forward, you know, what works, what doesn't work, you know, it's been good. And so I wanted to ask a question about you know, so sometimes there's this notion, you know, we were all, you know, just a couple weeks ago when Representative John Lewis passed away, you know, who would, you know, been an activist, you know, a civil rights movement activist before his long career in public service as in the United States Congress. So, you know, so we were seeing a lot of, you know, kind of vintage newsreels, of civil rights marches. Of course, his, famous Bloody Sunday attack by the police at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and then the eventual march for voting rights to Montgomery, and I think there's this notion sometimes that, in conventional there's this kind of rosy glasses or kind of at looking at the past, and there's this notion that there was some sort of consensus, that of course, everyone around, Dr. King, or certainly in, at least in the Black churches or, progressive white churches that, and, progressive Jewish communities, that everyone, of course, wanted to do this. And that's just, if you really, I do history, I study history a lot, and it's like, if you look at the historical record, that just wasn't true then or now. And so if you could comment, as much as you feel comfortable, about how your own decision, as a religious activist, your decision to go out there, to train and maybe to train others and maybe to try to convince, your fellow congregants, to go out there. What kind of challenges did you run up against, in your own religious communities as you were making your own decisions about activism?
First of all, activism isn't a choice. It's not something that you wake up one morning and decide, I think I'll become an advocate or an activist. No, it's like a gene that you're born with, and either you have it or you don't. So I tell people often that ask, what made you decide to become an activist? How did it happen? And how you prepared for these sort of things? And the easy answer is sharks are born swimming. It's just something that's inside of you, and when things present themselves, what to do. Going back to the 60s and the civil rights struggle, there was very much a chasm in the group of leaders and leadership that was there, with Dr. King, with the Freedom Riders, with the SCLC. Everyone had their own vision as to how things should progress and what should be done. Fast forward that to modern day, and we look at the same things happening within the religious communities, and even here in Charlottesville. The formation of the clergy collective was very much necessary, and I'm very grateful and happy that was born out of all of this hatred, because of the work that we continue to do. But even then, there was division as to how things should proceed from a religious aspect. Of course, out of that, the group Congregate Seville was born, who I often refer to as the radical little brother of the clergy collective, because that group was and continues to be willing to take on things that some members of the CCC and they just have not been willing to. And I mean, God bless both groups, because they have their different ways of going about achieving the same goal. And that's exactly the same way that we was back in the 60s, if you will, with the different factions that were all fighting for social justice, that were all fighting for civil rights, that all had the same end game in mind, but just different ways of going about achieving it.
Mm-hmm. May I? You want?
Yeah, please.
A couple of things. One, I'm a student of James Lawson, who spoke at Congressman Lewis's funeral. He trained me, and I in turn train others in the tradition that he trained me in. And he noted to me that less than 10% of clergy in any city they went into participated in the civil rights movement. Right. When King comes out against the Vietnam War, over 150 newspapers trash him. His own board censors him. Right. King's approval ratings August 1966 is less than 20%, right? So that's just the reality in terms of what we face. I think one of the things is that when we mythologize, as if you've noted, right, we do young people a disservice because we're just not lying to them about the possibilities of what's real. And then secondly, every city that we've been, the Deep Abiding Love has been into, there's been an established group of clergy, right? Because I am a son of the church. I'm an ordained elder in the Church of God in Christ. I'm here to make sure y'all get saved. Not you, Rabbi, but the rest of them. The rest of them. Is that that we've had to ignore, like we've had, you know, I go in, I bow to the elders, thank them for the work that they've done, because most of them have some proximity to the civil rights movement. They have battle scars we will never know, right? So I'm about to them, and then we're gonna organize them, right? Sekou Touré says the job of revolutionaries is to make counter-revolutionaries work for the revolution. And so the task then becomes, and this was the genius of Seth and Reverend Smash with Congregate Seville, was how do you create a mobile, agile group of folks who are willing to take risk, right? But you don't have to do so trashing the other crew, right? Because the congregates, the clergy collective becomes significant in the aftermath, right? Because they provide cover for some of the protesters when they were on trial. Right? You remember those important letters that came out of the clergy collective, right? Provided some cover, right? And pushed city administrators in a different kind of way that Congregate Seville could not push them, right? And so the task becomes, what are the ways in which we can leverage people's positionality in the ecology of social movements in such a way that it gives us a greater good, right? So for instance, when we think about Social Security, my comrades, the Marxists, we want a guaranteed income. We get Social Security, right? The comrades are not trashing Social Security. They understand that it's a political concession, but they understand that they create the political space. So what Congregate Charlottesville does was created the political space broad enough for religious people to bounce around in a variety of issues that ultimately we pray were pointing to a greater good.
I can speak a little bit about the challenges that the Jewish community in Charlottesville faced in the weeks leading up to both the KKK rally on July 8th, as well as the events of August 11th and 12th. I think there are a few different things to note. One is that we have Holocaust survivors in our congregation, or senior citizens who had a lot of contact with Holocaust survivors in their lives. And so the idea of neo-Nazis coming to town was an extremely terrifying experience for them. And so hiding at home with the shades pulled, for some of those folks, probably felt like the only thing that they could handle. I think the messaging from both the city, the police, UVA, and also some Jewish organizations was stay home. The safest thing to do is not to respond. Don't give these people any oxygen. And I think that for the majority of Jews, the 80-ish% of Jews who are white, we're used to listening to authority. And the idea of civil disobedience, for example, feels really, really uncomfortable. Even for me, when I first showed up at the trainings, I was confused. I did not understand why we were preparing to come up against the police. Now I understand it in a very different way than I did then. But for Jews, we think about going to the high holidays, gathering in a synagogue with potentially a few thousand people, knowing that we might be a target, and the police signifying safety for us in those moments. So it's very, very complex and very difficult. And I feel like there was one other thing I was going to say, but I've lost it for now, but that's a good start, I think.
All right. Yeah, challenges and debate that your activism engendered within your own community. Grace, do you want to speak to this?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I'm of several minds. Like, my dear spiritual community is not a monolith. And I felt really proud that on the day of August 12th, there were a lot of leaders from, I'm Episcopalian, from the Episcopal Church. Our bishops, or one of them, came on August 12th, and just one came because they were like, well, we can't send both because what if there's violence and we lose one of, they were thinking smart things like that. And then there were, a handful of Episcopal clergy who I think really, really showed up and really put in the long work. I think where the rubber hits the road for me, and sometimes in my tradition, and I think this probably goes for a lot of mainline white traditions like the Episcopal Church, is that we're really good at reading the books and talking about the things and getting really good at having the argument in your head. But when it comes time to go to the meetings or to step outside the church committee, that's where folks where putting in the actual work is sometimes not what folks are doing. So, and I think like what Rabbi Rachel was just saying, when you do start showing up and when you do start experiencing things, you begin to get transformed. So I got called angry a lot. I got called, why is she so mad about this from folks in my tradition. And I too, was raised to respect police and to go with the status quo and to not ruffle feathers. But once you step out and start experiencing the transformation of what it looks like to stand in solidarity with marginalized people, you kind of can't go back. And all the books in the world all the book clubs in the world, God bless them, are not going to teach you, or not going to transform your spirit like that. So yeah, there's some frustration around circling or just being too inward focused just on the church itself. And and I have to say there's lots of amazing leadership pushing folks still too, but leadership at the top doesn't always reflect what the people are doing, but I'm grateful.
Jelaine, I remembered the last thing that I wanted to say.
Yes.
And I think maybe because Grace was talking and she and I have had a couple of conversations about this, but I think there's one other thing that can get really complicated for Jewish communities, and I think was complicated for CBI, is that there is, and this is in my opinion, and I know this is controversial, and I'm gonna take a little risk here. On the left, there is a problem sometimes in which criticism of Israel becomes a prominent conversation point and moves from criticism of policy and leadership into a kind of anti-Semitism, in which Jews are seen as and spoken about as all powerful, and all Zionists are this and all Zionists are that, and really nasty words that have been spoken about all Zionists coming from the left at times. And so I think that for me, part of my journey was being in relationship with people that I really strongly disagree with on that issue, and learning how to move through the discomfort of that, and also to help educate people on this is a criticism, this is an anti-Semitic statement. But I think that for Jews, the consequence of that is that at times it can start to feel like a very, very scary and unsafe world, in which now you're telling me don't rely on the police, but I have lots of Israelis here in my congregation, and the people over here are saying really, really terrible things about an entire group of people, and some of those people are with us. And so there's not an easy answer to this, but I want to raise that because I think it's a really, really important part of what sometimes goes on in the Jewish community.
I feel like one of the first conversations we had, Rabbi, in the church was on this question.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'm right, you wrong. We're going to struggle together.
It was hard. hard. It was hard, but important.
I think one of the challenges also is that I wonder, because we actually faced something similar in Ferguson, with the rabbi there, who showed up in real ways for young people.
Rabbi Susan Talvey.
That's right, and we had a very different relationship. We had a different position on Israel and Palestine. She and I did, but I would always defend the fact that she showed up in a way that was important. So I think one of the ways is that we named the anti-Semitism for what it is, right? It is a vicious, ugly tradition that emerges out of Christianity, and that wherever a nation has had to use the word Christian in the title of who they are, they've resulted in pogroms and attacks on Jewish brothers and sisters, right? So we want to name anti-Semitism for what it is. I think also, what's always strange to me is like, and it plays itself out in around, say, queer stuff and other things like, and Jelaine Professor Smith know what they was getting, but when they invited me on here, so I'm gonna say it like this here. Them Nazis don't give a fuck who you are, right? You remember when we were in the streets, it was mostly homophobic, right? And mostly anti-Semitic slurs that were being yelled at us, right? Now, they didn't say nigga because they probably knew, that might have been a problem. but in terms of things going at what Kierkegaard called, I think it's Kierkegaard called a momentary suspension of the ethical dimension, right? So people would have beat them up, right? But they were homophobic and they were anti-Semitic. And so so oftentimes for me, it's like the enemy that is coming at us hates us all. And the only way you beat fascism, right, is with a broad coalition. And in this context, if you're gonna beat fascism in a broad coalition, you got to get your arms around as many people as you possibly can, right? Mm-hmm. And it does not mean that there's not room to debate. It does not mean that we can't wrestle over these questions, right? And and I said, and it was clear to me that even if we wrestle over the question of Palestine and Israel and that kind of thing, if anybody come to that damn synagogue, they're gonna have to get through me to get to it, right? And so it feels as though sometimes that that we foreground a criticism or a politic as a means to really shield that we ain't really interested in the broader question, right? You know what I'm saying? So we'll weaponize a certain kind of identity or a certain kind of politic in such a way that it ultimately undermines the possibility. Again, this is not saying we don't have room for debate. We're just not saying that we don't wrestle over these questions, but it is to say we name anti-Semitism for what it is. And that, and it also does not give Jewish brothers and sisters an excuse to retreat from the movement for racial justice in the United States because somebody criticized Israel. Right? They don't give you a chance to retreat. Like if I left social movement spaces every time somebody said something racist, I wouldn't leave the house. Right? You see what I'm saying? So at the same time, we want to name the anti-Semitism, but we don't want to give Jewish brothers and sisters, get them off the hook for if somebody's a Christian, they want to leave movement. And then we want to get our arms around as many people as we can for what's going to be needed in an anti-fascist coalition.
All right, I want to turn, if we can now, we've got a lot of folks in the audience here, over 200 people I'm seeing, and there's a lot of questions. We got stuff gotten upvoted here, and I want to, this is a question, to kind of put out to you, that is, how can members of congregations engage their clergy people to become more involved in the work of social justice. Now, of course, all of you, religious leaders here, you were the leaders that were doing this, but this is a question, how, this person is saying many seem to shy away from the politics, of their congregants, so how would you encourage kind of rank and file folks in congregations to encourage this, from their own religious leaders in their own religious communities?
Well, as the lay person or the non-ordained person on the panel.
I thought I ordained you already.
No, not yet. Yeah, and also a strong believer in Ella Baker style organizing, who said that strong communities don't need strong leaders. I think so often, especially in traditions like mine that are quite hierarchical, that are very deferent to the clergy authority, we can think that it has to come from the top and church policy has to come from the top. But if you organize your whole congregation to demand something, the clergy person has to listen. And if they're not, then if they don't listen, then they're not being a good pastor to you and your community. So yeah, I don't think you have to be a quote unquote, or you don't have to look like what you think a leader looks like to be able to start transforming your congregation. And in some ways, probably it's better to come from not a top-down way. It's much more sustainable and yeah, more organic coming from the community.
Okay, yeah. We've got some alums, as it were, of the Summer of Hate, folks who have gone on, moved away and carried their religious leadership to other communities. There's a, kind of a diaspora, if you will. And we've got Reverend Elaine and Reverend Susan. I just want to, give a shout out to you. They're in, that have moved on. And questions are, how has the narrative changed? This is a question, one narrative, that there was this narrative in congregations that emphasized the thought that white supremacists came in from the outside, that this was afflicted upon us, by outsiders, while other people, especially Black residents, named the truth that white supremacists were already here. And so the question is, has that narrative changed? Have you seen changes in that narrative in the 3 years since?
To some degree, but it still hasn't been fully embraced here in Charlottesville. That they walk amongst us on a daily basis. That just like when there were Klan rallies and Klan lynchings in the past, through history, many of them hold high levels of leadership positions here, but they're what you could classify now as closet racists. It's like the song, "The freaks come out at night." They're still very much hidden. They can't afford at this point for their racist activities to be uncovered. But that doesn't mean that they still don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So the narrative it shifted somewhat, but again, as I said, still hasn't been fully embraced. Not to the point that we truly need to reckon with it.
And I think also, if it's not only just outsiders, is the ways in which it's baked in, right? It's curious to me that UVA produces Richard Spencer and Kessler, right? That's curious to me.
And brother, those are just the two that we
know.
Covered.
But I'm just saying, but the fact that the university produced both of them should be an indictment on the institution, that the institution needs to do some repenting, right, around these questions. Like, what does it mean to come to Jefferson's intellectual alma mater, in which we have discourses about notions of democracy, notions of civility, about golden ideas that he raised, which are important golden ideas with all of his contradictions as well, right? About what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be a person inside. what is happening in the institution educationally that folks come in that institution and then don't leave transformed, right? They don't need to be Marxist, but not being a Nazi would be a good way to be, right? And so I think that part of it is what's baked into the institutionality of it, right? I think one of the things is also because Charlottesville, as the brother Mayor said, was the capital of the resistance, right? And it became a contested space by virtue of that proclamation. I think that part of small liberal towns like Charlottesville or Asheville or Austin and other places like that, which have that are universities towns, have to come to terms with what are the ways in which their institutions are creating the possibilities to produce these kinds of people in their institutions, and what is the failure of the education thereof.
And I think that brings up for me too, Sekou, something a narrative that I think started to be debunked in Charlottesville, which is, who are white supremacists? What do they look like? What are they like? And there's so much classism and anti-Southern bias baked into that. Like, oh, white supremacists are just the gun-toting KKK members that live in his trailer park and are uneducated, and all of these sort of ways that we scapegoat poor and working class people in the South. But we know that these folks are powerful. They come from highly educated institutions. They come from money. They come from north of the Mason-Dixon line in many cases. So I think also, you know, when we say they're coming from inside or outside, Jelaine, I think you were asking about Charlottesville itself, but also just kind of trying to like rethink this narrative of who is white supremacists, like who are the people that we need to worry about, and yeah, what kind of biases are shaping that, because if we don't know who we're actually talking about and we're not taking them seriously because we're dismissing them based on class or whatever, then we're not going to know how to adequately fight them back. And I think in Charlottesville, as we were tracking these folks, we started to realize, like, oh my gosh, these are very powerful people who are, if not holding seats of public office, very close to people who do, or who are talking to them, or, you know, who have massive followings online of people that, you know, also have pressure power. So I just had to throw that in there too.
And you remember when we're watching Trump's response, right? Bannon is in the White House. Steve Miller is in the White House.
Exactly.
Right. While we are dealing with the aftermath of a Nazi killing one of our comrades, right? So I think that I think that's extremely important. And then history shows us that white nationalist movements are bourgeois movements. They're actually movements of elites. Right? That's not right. They're movements of middle class and upper middle class who threatened by the possibilities of those who've been historically other getting access to perceive resources that they and opportunities they do not exert. And so I think
but while you say that, brother, remember what Trump just recently did with his executive order on rallying and saving the suburbanites, where we keep the low income and the affordable housing residents from moving into their neighborhoods, and how he very publicly wanted to express his support for those suburbanites, those suburban ladies, those rich white women, so that they don't ever have to be concerned about having their neighborhoods affected and infiltrated by low-income residents. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut across. No. Right at that point.
Yeah.
I just think it needed to be made.
Got another question here. I'm kind of combining a number of them, which is that we're apparently some folks in the audience, they're being convicted, and they want to know, you know, how do they get involved? What resources do folks recommend to receive this kind of discipline training, and to teach others? You know, like, I mean, we were very fortunate that we had Rev. Sekou come in with us for that summer, you know, and lead us and guide us, you know, through some, you know, techniques and, you know, and tactics and this sort of thing. But, you know, where can people go? Where can people turn to get this kind of discipline training and to receive that and then to teach others? Recommendations?
Well,
look at the verbiage coming out of the White House and go the other direction.
Simple as that.
Other than that, grab Ibram X. Kendi's book on how to be an anti-racist, because it's not enough right now just to be non-racist. You have to actually put in the work of being an anti-racist. That's a great start right now, and a good jumping off point, because that foxhole that we're in right now is deep and wide, and there's plenty of room for everybody to jump in this fight.
I mean, Deep Abiding Love, we've started to do some more trainings, and we've been trying to figure out a way to try to do the trainings on the internet. And so we're still trying to figure that out. There's a wonderful book by a woman named Lisa Fithian. So Lisa Fithian is like the Jedi of this movement, and Lord, her book is slipping me. What is Lisa? What's Lisa's book, Grace?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not hip to the anti-racist books right now. I don't.
Not, but she's the she did a book. It's on organizing. Siri, what's Lisa Fithian's book?
Gonna ask the cop in your phone.
Shut it down. Stories. Shut it down. Stories from a fierce, loving resistance. And it's by Lisa Fithian. And so that's and it has a lot of, because she's been in this work all the way from Seattle. And so that's a good book to work. We are, I guess if you if you follow me on the Insta books and grams and all of that stuff, we may be doing some trainings on that. And then there's a church called Valley and Mountain that I've been privileged to spend some time with in Seattle. And on their on their Facebook page are the trainings that we've done. So you can actually watch the trainings that we did there. Yeah, and then I would lastly say that we're in the midst of a great uprising. I would show up with somebody, with a buddy at protest, and observe what's happening and see what's and get a sense of what's happening. Do what you can to stay out of the way and to stay safe. And then try to come back and meet in groups and that kind of thing. To develop kind of pods, if you will, as a way of reflection. It's something we've been doing with the Lutheran diocese in Minneapolis with Bob Hoteen and Reverend Corla Masters there. And so those are just some random things that come to mind.
And we'll put links to these organizations, well, just to the audience here on the website. So do come back to the Religion Lab and we'll link to that. And Rabbi Rachel, please. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, before July 8th KKK rally, I did my first civil disobedience training with showing up for racial justice. Now, I don't know what that looks like in the middle of a pandemic where it's pretty hard to link arms and practice those things, but that was sort of my first taste of it, and then continued with Rev Sekou. So I think that trying to find civil disobedience training, even if there's not a protest you're going to right now, like it may help you if you see a Black person getting pulled over on the side of the road by a police officer and you want to bear witness and step in. So I would check showing up for racial justice for that.
Mm-hmm.
Grace, can you, we have a national staff person from Surge showing up for racial justice. If you can talk with the audience, Grace, about, what does your organization do?
Yeah, sure. Well, I want to start by saying, I don't mean to be a broken record, but doing direct action and nonviolent disobedience with your body, civil disobedience with your body is not the only way to be doing the work right now. And I there's all the individual actions that we can take in the world, but what's powerful about what happened at the direct action in Charlottesville was that it was people working together, and organizing teaches us that we are, greater than the sum of our parts. And I think to adequately take on the power of the right and what's happening, how power is coalescing right now, we have to be acting together. And at Surge and at so many other organizations, I mean, really, I think for me, I would just say, whether you're white and it's Surge, or you want to be organizing white people and it's showing up for racial justice, which is what we do, organize white communities, multiracial coalition of folks organizing in white communities. But I would just encourage folks to find a long-term political home. That could be Surge, that could be the Reverend Barber, it's escaping me, the Poor People's Campaign. It could be maybe like a pipeline fight that's happening nearby you. Wherever you are, there's someone that's doing political work near you. And that doesn't mean that you have to, you know, block traffic. It could mean that you use the gifts and talents and abilities that you have, which could be doing legal research, or it could be bailing people like Sekou and Rachel and Deacon Don out of jail when they get arrested from their direct actions. So yeah, Surge is doing a lot, and is a great place to start. But also just any political organization that you can be like growing in relationship with people and being transformed in for the rest of your life, because this is not just a one-off thing. We got to be committed to it, you know, for a long time.
Right. You know, sometimes, you know, people ask me, you know, like, you know, what can I do, you know, in this? And you're right. I think sometimes there's this kind of glamour attached, you know, putting your body on the line and being in the streets, and, you know, and that's really the tip of the spear, if you'll excuse the, you know, military metaphor, you know, there. But yeah, that there's a whole lot of support and infrastructure, you know, going on behind the scenes, you know, that makes it possible for some people that feel called to do that sort of work, you know, to do that. But there's a whole lot going on, you know. Someone mentioned earlier the therapists, you know, who were so wonderful, you know, with the healing process, you know, in the aftermath, you know, and these are people that, you know, you know, you wouldn't, you know, they weren't on CNN and, you know, and all this thing, but they took care of us, you know, afterwards. You know, there's lots of ways, you know, you got, you know, dads doing IT work, and, you know, and teenagers volunteering to babysit, you know, activists during meetings, little old church ladies making casseroles. You remember that? That was great. You know, church lady casseroles. That was, you know, there's lots of ways, you know, to be involved. I tell people to, you know, some of the way, you know, cop watch is a real important thing to do. I mean, Rabbi Rachel, you talked about, you know, cop watching, you know, and, you know, being vigilant, you know, you when you see a person of color, you know, being accosted by a cop, just stop what you're doing, get out and start filming. You may save some Black person's life.
Yeah.
Cop watch. You know, and you know, another kind of my favorite advice is I tell people to join their HOA, their homeowners association. You know, don't let them know that you're progressive, you know, just join up, and, you know, they're always looking for leadership, you know, and then push back against their NIMBY excuses, you know, for why there can't be a duplex, triplex, or quadplex in the neighborhood, you know, this sort of thing. You know, a lot of this racism it's embedded in the zoning codes, and, you know, supposedly just normal stuff, you know, but there's a lot there. So there's real everyday stuff and struggles, you know, that need to go on, that you know, don't require, you know, necessarily, you know, being, you know, face to face with armed Nazis in a park, you know, but are very important, you know, and need to happen, you know.
But I do want to encourage people to do acts of civil disobedience if they're able, at least once.
If they're able, yeah. If
they're able. And the reason why is that it gives you a sense of what is happening in the world, and what it means to be confronting state actors and non-state actors, and that it's a kind of baptism, right? And to excuse my Pentecostal parlance, it's a visitation of the Holy Ghost. There's something happen, like when all that shit is happening around us, and them Nazis and police and it's riot gear out there, and somehow you look around there and you're like, I have lost my mind. I am not making good choices. Right? That's what I thought when we came around that corner, that I was like, needed an intervention, and I wasn't making good choices. But something also happens when we sing in the midst of that is transformative, right? Right? There's something about when you are scared out of your mind and you're with a community of people, and that your collective courage is greater than your individual fear. Right? I think that's important. I'm not saying do it all the time. There's plenty right? There are many roles that people can play, but I want to keep track of it because I just want to, and this is not a dig against what you've said, Grace, but rather is to say that we want to hold that opportunity for people to experience Pentecost in the streets with one another.
Well, and there's nothing at all glamorous about being threatened or feeling threatened. No one at all is advocating anyone becoming a martyr. That certainly is not the end goal or the end game here. But those folks that are out front, those folks that are on the front lines, we, whoever, stand very much on the shoulders of those people that are giving the water out, that are rinsing the eyes out after people have been hit with tear gas. The medics that stand behind that you don't see, but thank God that they're there. The ones who give you that continued encouragement to push forward, to push through, who without them, the fight and the heart for the fight probably would have been lost a long time ago. Those are the people who deserve the real credit, because they're not seen, they're not known, and in many ways and instances, that's because that's what they want. But they're the ones back there in the back that are doing the work that allow those in the front to continue to push forward.
The Care Bears, y'all remember the Care Bears?
Yes, absolutely.
What was the sister's name who ran the Care Bears? I used to make fun of her. God.
You mean Dolly?
Was it Dolly who ran the Care Bears?
I think it
No, it
was.
was somebody else in 2017. Who was it?
She ran the Care Bears, and I used to mock her for that.
Oh no, we can't do without Care Bears. They got.
But they brought us the water. They
Yeah.
made sure we were okay. And while we're, I just want,
And also the legal observers.
Stay hydrated. That's a lesson for life.
Yeah.
You know.
The legal observer. And then I want to name Reverend Elaine Thomas for this reason. She was not the senior pastor of her church. She was associate pastor. A woman associate pastor took a risk and brought us about 700 of us into her church, right? And I just want to name her.
I think it was the rector's. I think it was his second week on the job or something.
The rector secretary. It was his second week on the job. He had no idea what he had got into. And then, so I just want to name that risk that she took, right? Yeah. And I also want to say the same thing for Rabbi Rachel. There were risks that folks took in their congregations by being out front on this, right? Same thing with Reverend Smash, right? And others. I want to thank, Deacon Gathers for giving us that old church, the oldest church in Charlottesville, to meet in the morning before we went out. Like, these are risks that people are taking, that folks make assumptions about, about what churches and religious institutions and religious leaders need to do. But I just wanted to make sure I named them.
Jenny Phillips, that's the Care Bear.
Oh, Jenny, that's right.
Jenny Phillips.
That's right, Jenny. We want to name.
Great.
But making sure we had water.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Preach.
Well, I want to kind of end our evening here, but just to tell our audience that if you go to our website for the Religion, Race, and Democracy Lab, we will have links, to some of these organizations to which we referred, during our conversation. Also links to organizations in Charlottesville that are doing the work of racial justice. If you want to, connect with them, donate to them, be in contact, see what kind of work is ongoing. This did not end in the streets on August the 12th, 2017. And we always said all summer when we were training that what we're really training for is August the 13th. We knew this wasn't over, and we knew that it was ongoing. And so let's keep struggling together. And I want to thank the Religion, Race, and Democracy Lab for having us here. And I want to thank everyone in the audience for tuning in. And there'll be future programs. Just keep watching this site and keep watching social media. Thank you very much. And thank you to the panel. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, y'all. Good to be with you. Charlottesville forever.
God bless you all. The
bless you.
Good to see you.
Thank you, everybody. Wear your masks.
Yes.
Wear your
And stay
mask.
hydrated.
And
Yes.
stay hydrated.
Continue to be safe, be vigilant. They still walk amongst us.
Yes.